For 2,000 years, the idea of rebuilding the Temple of Jerusalem was considered religious fantasy. There was no nation of Israel. There was no Jerusalem under Jewish control. There were no trained priests. There were no sacred utensils. There was not even realistic hope that this would change. Today, Israel has existed for more than 75 years. Jerusalem has been under Jewish control since 1967, and an institute in Jerusalem has already trained more than 500 men from the lineage of Aaron to officiate sacrifices that have not been performed for almost 2 millennia. What was prophecy is becoming logistics. What was theology is becoming engineering. What was impossible is becoming a schedule. And if you think this is still distant theory, you need to know what is already ready. Because the inventory is extensive and disturbingly concrete. In 1987, just months after the first Palestinian Intifada erupted, a rabbi named Yisrael Ariel founded an organization with a bold name, Machon Hamikdash, the Temple Institute. Ariel was not just any rabbi. He was one of the paratroopers who participated in the capture of the Temple Mount during the Six-Day War of 1967. He was present at the exact moment when Israeli soldiers reached the Western Wall. He saw generals weeping. He heard the shofar sound for the first time in decades at that location. And from that day forward, he dedicated his life to a single mission, preparing everything necessary so that the temple service could be resumed immediately when circumstances permitted. The declared mission was not to study the temple as a historical relic. It was not to create a museum. It was not to produce educational material. It was to manufacture every utensil, train every priest, research every architectural detail, solve every technical problem. It was real preparation for real reconstruction. And 37 years later, the inventory of what has already been manufactured defies any skepticism. The golden candlestick, the menorah, was completed in 2007 after years of meticulous work. It is not a decorative replica. It is a functional object built for use in the Third Temple. It weighs half a ton. It contains 45 kilograms of pure gold, valued at approximately $3 million. It was constructed following the exact specifications from the book of Exodus, chapter 25, verses 31 through 40. The artisans worked under constant rabbinical supervision, consulting every detail in Talmudic commentaries that preserved information transmitted orally since the destruction of the Second Temple. The form is exactly as described in the scriptures. 7 branches emerging from a central base, almond-shaped cups ornamenting each branch, spherical knobs at the junction points, decorative flowers in the specified locations. The height corresponds to the rabbinical calculation of approximately 1 meter and 70 centimeters. And the candlestick is not locked in a vault. It is on permanent public display, protected by bulletproof glass just meters from the Western Wall, in the Temple Institute's visitor center. Thousands of tourists see it every year. It waits there, gleaming under carefully designed lighting, as if awaiting only the order to be transported a few hundred meters up the hill. Beside the menorah, other utensils complete the inventory. The incense altar was finished following Exodus chapter 30, verses 1 through 10. Acacia wood overlaid with pure gold. The dimensions correspond exactly to what is specified. 1 cubit by 1 cubit at the base, forming a perfect square, and 2 cubits in height. The 4 horns at the upper corners are present exactly as described. The gold molding around the top is there. The side rings for transport with poles are positioned. Every detail verified against the biblical text and rabbinical commentaries. The table of showbread also already exists. Exodus chapter 25, verses 23 through 30 provided the specifications. Pure gold molded in rectangular form. 12 divisions for the 12 loaves representing the 12 tribes of Israel, the utensils that accompany the table, the bowls for incense, the spoons for handling, the jars and cups for libations, all manufactured according to biblical instructions. The table would be positioned in the holy place, the first compartment of the sanctuary, where priests would enter daily to change the bread and perform their duties, and the priestly garments are ready. This is perhaps the most impressive from a technical standpoint because the garments described in the Bible are extraordinarily complex. The Temple Institute employs a team of artisans specialized in ancient weaving. They spent years researching textile techniques from the biblical period. They recreated ancient looms. They learned to work with gold threads interwoven with linen. They mastered the dyeing techniques using natural ingredients that produce the specific colors mentioned in the scriptures. Sky blue extracted from a sea snail called chilazon, purple from another mollusk, crimson from a specific worm. The ephod of the high priest, that complex piece that covers the shoulders and chest, has already been made. 2 onyx stones on the shoulders, each engraved with 6 names of tribes of Israel, exactly as Exodus chapter 28 describes. The breastplate, called choshen in Hebrew, is complete. 12 different precious stones, each representing a tribe, set in gold in 4 rows of 3. The names are engraved. The gold chains connecting the breastplate to the ephod have been braided. The fine linen turban that the high priest wears on his head is ready, including the plate of pure gold on the front with the inscription, "Holy to the Lord," engraved. The blue robe worn under the ephod was woven from a single piece, without seams, with fabric pomegranates and golden bells alternating along the lower hem. Each piece took months or years to complete. Each was verified by rabbinical authorities. Each is stored under controlled conditions, ready for use. And there is more. The silver trumpets mentioned in Numbers chapter 10 have already been forged. There are 2, exactly as specified, made of hammered silver, used to summon the congregation and signal movements. The Levitical, musical instruments are being reconstructed. The 10-stringed lyres called nevel in Hebrew, the smaller harps called kinnor, the bronze cymbals. Researchers studied ancient representations, consulted Talmudic descriptions, analyzed archaeological finds. The resulting instruments are not approximations. They are serious attempts at faithful reconstruction. The vessels for libations are ready. The shovels for handling altar ashes are ready. The basins for collecting sacrificial blood are ready. Every object necessary for the daily functioning of the temple has been catalogued, researched, designed, and manufactured. But utensils are objects. They can sit in display cases indefinitely. What truly indicates urgency are the people. And here the preparation reaches another level of seriousness. The Jewish priesthood does not function like clergy in other religions. It is not a vocation. It is not a spiritual calling. It is not a personal choice. It is bloodline. Only direct descendants of Aaron, brother of Moses, can officiate in the temple. This lineage is called Kohanim, the priests. During 2,000 years of dispersion throughout the world, entire families preserved this identity from generation to generation. Surnames like Cohen, Khan, Kagan, Katz are indicators of this descent. Family traditions passed information forward. Community records documented who was a Cohen and who was not. Modern genetic research has confirmed something extraordinary. The majority of men who identify as Kohanim share a specific marker on the Y chromosome, called by scientists the Cohen modal haplotype. This indicates common patrilineal ancestry going back thousands of years. Oral tradition preserved the lineage in a scientifically verifiable way. But preserving a surname and genetic material does not mean being prepared to officiate animal sacrifices according to specific rituals that have not been practiced for almost 2 millennia. The procedures are complex. The laws of ritual purity are intricate. The ceremonial movements are precise. Errors can have grave spiritual consequences according to tradition. Therefore, training is essential. The Temple Institute has identified and is training hundreds of men of verified priestly lineage. More than 500 have already undergone some level of instruction. They learn the exact rituals described in the book of Leviticus. They study the 5 main types of offerings: the burnt offering consumed entirely, the grain offering, the peace offering of fellowship, the sin offering, the guilt offering. Each type has specific procedures. Each procedure has variations depending on who is offering and for what reason. They memorize everything. They practice the physical movements, the correct way to hold the animal, the precise angle of the cut at the throat, the method of collecting blood in basins, the technique of sprinkling blood on the corners of the altar, the way to separate the portions to be burned from the portions to be consumed. They study the laws of ritual purity that determine who can and cannot enter specific areas of the temple at specific times. They learn which contaminations prevent service and how to purify oneself from each. It is not merely theoretical study, it is practical training for functions that have not been performed for 1,954 years, since the Roman army under Titus destroyed the Second Temple in 70 AD. And there is a school dedicated exclusively to this. The Neza HaKodesh, which means Crown of the Holy, operates in Jerusalem, training young Kohanim from adolescence. It is a religious boarding school with a specialized curriculum. The students wear uniforms that imitate the priestly garments described in the Bible. They wear the linen turban. They use the white tunic. They practice maintaining a state of ritual purity according to Levitical laws. They learn to slaughter animals according to sacrificial kosher laws, which are more rigorous than slaughter laws for common consumption. They practice blood sprinklings using models. They rehearse the exact movements their ancestors performed in Herod's temple 2,000 years ago. The curriculum includes intensive studies of the Talmud, specifically the tractates that discuss temple laws, Kodashim, which deals with holy things, and Tehorot, which deals with ritual purity. The students spend years immersed in texts that most Jews never study deeply. They emerge as specialists in procedures that the rest of the world considers historical relics. But no training matters without complete ritual purification. And here enters the rarest element of all, so rare that its appearance is monitored globally as an event of prophetic significance: the red heifer. Numbers chapter 19 describes an absolutely unique ritual in all of the Torah. A cow must be completely red, every hair on its body without exception. If there are 2 white or black hairs together, it is disqualified. If it has ever carried any yoke or performed any work, it is disqualified. The qualified heifer must be taken outside the camp, slaughtered and burned entirely, along with cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet wool. The resulting ashes are collected and stored. When mixed with running water, they create the only means of purification for the most severe of ritual contaminations: contact with human death. Any person who touches a corpse, enters the same tent as a corpse, or even passes over a grave, becomes ritually impure for 7 days. This impurity prevents entry into the temple. It prevents participation in sacred rituals, and it can only be removed by water mixed with ashes of the red heifer, sprinkled on the 3rd and 7th days of impurity. Here is the logistical problem that has blocked everything. For 2,000 years, after generations of living among non-Jews, frequenting cemeteries, unable to avoid contact with death, the entire Jewish population is considered ritually impure. All trained Kohanim are technically impure. None can officiate. To purify them, the ash of the red heifer is necessary, but the last red heifer was burned before the destruction of the second temple. The ashes ran out centuries ago, and it is not possible to produce new ashes without a ritually pure Kohen to officiate the burning. But no pure Kohen exists without ashes to purify him. It is a logical impasse that seems impossible to resolve. Some traditions suggest that a small quantity of ashes was preserved and hidden, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Others indicate that the first red heifer of the Messianic period will have special status that will bypass the paradox. The Temple Institute operates under the premise that when a qualified heifer appears, the path for its use will be opened somehow. And in September of 2022, 5 red heifers arrived in Israel from a farm in Texas, United States. They were acquired through contacts between American evangelical farmers and representatives of the Temple Institute. The plane journey was carefully coordinated. The heifers arrived young, only a few months old, so that their entire existence in Israel could be monitored against accidental work. Immediately after arrival, specialist rabbis examined each animal meticulously, hair by hair, centimeter by centimeter. The search was for any disqualification. 2 white hairs together, a hidden dark spot, any irregularity. 4 of the 5 passed the initial inspection as potentially qualified. The term is careful because final qualification can only be determined when they reach the minimum age of 3 years. The 4 surviving heifers are kept on a farm in the Judean desert near Shiloh, the ancient Israelite capital before Jerusalem. The location was chosen strategically, far from traffic, far from noise, far from any situation that could result in accidental work. If a heifer is accidentally mounted by a person, if it is used for any transport, if it carries any weight, it is automatically disqualified. Feeding is controlled. Movement is monitored. Veterinarians check health regularly, but avoid procedures that might be interpreted as using the animal. The heifers basically exist to exist, growing slowly until the age of qualification. When they complete 3 years of age, they will be inspected one final time. Every hair will be examined again under intense light. If any maintains completely red coloring without disqualifications, the purification ritual could potentially be performed for the first time in approximately 2,000 years. The window of time for them to reach the appropriate age was 2025. But preparing utensils, training priests, and raising heifers are technical challenges. Impressive, yes, but technically solvable with money, time, and dedication. The real obstacle is geographic, political, diplomatic, potentially military. Because the only place where the temple can be built according to Jewish tradition is the most disputed place on planet Earth. The Temple Mount, called Har Habayit in Hebrew or Mount Moriah in biblical reference, occupies approximately 144,000 square meters in the heart of Jerusalem. It is an artificially elevated platform expanded by Herod 2,000 years ago, supported by massive retaining walls. The Western Wall, where Jews pray, is merely one section of the western retaining wall of that platform. For Jews, it is the holiest place on earth. It was there that Abraham nearly sacrificed Isaac. There Jacob dreamed of the heavenly ladder. There Solomon built the first temple that housed the Ark of the Covenant. There the exiles who returned from Babylon erected the second temple. There Herod expanded and beautified that second temple until it became one of the wonders of the ancient world. There Jesus walked, taught, drove out the money changers. There the glory of God dwelt among his people. For Muslims, it is the third holiest place in Islam. They call it Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary. They believe that from there Muhammad ascended to heaven in the night journey described in the Quran. The Dome of the Rock, with its iconic golden dome visible from any point in Jerusalem, marks the rock where this ascension supposedly occurred. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, located in the southern portion of the mount, is the third holiest mosque after Mecca and Medina. Israel conquered East Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount, in the Six-Day War in June of 1967. Israeli paratroopers, including the young Yisrael Ariel, who decades later would found the Temple Institute, reached the Western Wall on June 7th. It was a moment of national euphoria. Soldiers wept, prayed, blew the shofar. For the first time in 1,900 years, Jews controlled the holiest site of their faith. But then came a decision that still generates controversy decades later. General Moshe Dayan, Minister of Defense, visited the Temple Mount days after the capture. He met with leaders of the Waqf, the Jordanian Islamic religious authority that administered the site, and he returned administration of the top of the mount to the Waqf. Israel would maintain sovereignty and security. The Waqf would maintain daily religious control. In practice, this means that Jews can visit the mount during limited hours, entering through a single gate, but they cannot pray openly. They cannot carry visible religious objects. They cannot make any gesture suggesting ritual. Israeli police accompany Jewish visitors and remove them immediately if they move their lips in silent prayer. Any act suggesting intention to build or modify the status quo is treated as incendiary provocation. So how would it be possible to erect the Third Temple without demolishing Islamic structures and provoking a war of unimaginable proportions? Some theories gain attention among researchers. The most influential theory comes from an archaeologist named Asher Kaufman, who proposes that the original temple was located significantly north of where the Dome of the Rock stands today. His research, based on topographical analysis, Talmudic references about lines of sight between specific points, and interpretation of archaeological finds, suggests that the Holy of Holies was in an area currently containing only a small dome called the Dome of the Spirits, or Dome of the Tablets. If Kaufman is correct, it would be technically possible to build the Third Temple north of the Dome of the Rock without touching the existing Islamic structures. The outer court mentioned in Revelation chapter 11 verse 2, given to the Gentiles, could be interpreted as prophetic permission for this coexistence. The reconstructed Jewish temple, the Islamic mosques preserved to the south, an architectural division of sacred space. Another theory points to geological events. The region sits on active seismic faults. Significant earthquakes have struck Jerusalem throughout history. Zechariah chapter 14 describes the Mount of Olives splitting in half when the Lord sets foot on it. If a devastating seismic event struck the mount, reconfigurations would be inevitable regardless of political negotiations. Structures damaged or destroyed by earthquake would create a situation completely different from what exists today. And there are those who suggest that a diplomatic agreement could open the way. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, speaks of an alliance confirmed with many for 1 week of years, that is, 7 years. Many scholars interpret this as a comprehensive peace treaty that would allow, among other things, the resumption of Jewish sacrifices. Perhaps not complete temple reconstruction immediately, but at least installation of an altar on the mount and beginning of sacrificial rituals. Precedent exists. When the exiles returned from Babylon under Zerubbabel, as recorded in Ezra chapters 3 and 4, the first thing they did was erect the altar and resume sacrifices. The temple foundations came later. The complete building was only finished years later. The altar was sufficient to restart the sacrificial system. What we know with certainty is that, regardless of which eventual path materializes, the physical preparations continue as if permission were imminent. The stones are already being cut. In quarries near Jerusalem, limestone blocks are being extracted and shaped following precise specifications. The principle of 1 Kings chapter 6 verse 7 is being observed rigorously. When Solomon's temple was built, the stones arrived ready at the site, cut at the quarry, so that no hammer, axe or iron tool was heard during assembly. It was construction in sacred silence. The blocks fit perfectly, without need for adjustment at the site. Modern preparers have studied both ancient and contemporary stone cutting techniques. They use precision technology to ensure each block is carved to exactly the specified dimensions. If and when construction begins, the stones can be transported and assembled quickly without tool noise at the sacred site. The architectural plans exist in multiple versions. The Temple Institute has developed detailed blueprints based primarily on the book of Ezekiel, chapters 40 through 43, which describes a vision of a future temple with specific measurements. These specifications were combined with Talmudic accounts of the Second Temple, archaeological finds from the Herodian period, and analysis of historical sources such as the writings of Flavius Josephus. Three-dimensional computerized models show every chamber, every courtyard, every gate, every ornamental detail. Physical scale models have been built and are on display. Structural engineering specialists have calculated foundation requirements for the rocky soil of the mount. Modern engineers have analyzed how current construction technologies could be applied following the religious restrictions of silence and absence of iron tools at the site. Some estimates suggest that with modular construction technology and intensive prefabrication, the Third Temple could be erected in approximately 3 years. Other more ambitious projections, assuming mobilization of resources at a national scale and continuous work shifts, speak of months. The basic structure could arise extraordinarily quickly if political and religious will were present. Modern cranes would solve in hours, lifting problems that required ramps and thousands of workers in antiquity. Motorized transport would bring materials quickly. Reinforced concrete foundations, if permitted, would accelerate stabilization. Everything that took decades in previous temples could happen in a fraction of the time. And the altar for the Third Temple is already ready, completely functional. In 2018, the Temple Institute revealed a sacrificial altar built following exact biblical specifications. Natural stones not shaped with iron tools, according to Exodus chapter 20 verse 25. Dimensions corresponding to rabbinical calculations for an altar appropriate to the Third Temple. Access ramp ascending gradually without steps, because Exodus chapter 20 verse 26 prohibits steps that could expose the priest indecently. Drainage channels for sacrificial blood, connecting the altar surface to a drainage system. The altar is modular, disassemblable, transportable. It can be reassembled on the Temple Mount when circumstances permit. It is not a model for study. It is operational equipment. In December of 2018, a public demonstration was held near the Temple Mount. Priests in training, dressed in the newly made vestments according to biblical specifications, simulated the complete sacrificial procedures. There was no actual animal sacrifice because complete ritual purification has not yet been performed. But every movement was rehearsed, every prayer was pronounced, every position was occupied. The entire ceremony was documented, filmed, photographed. It looked like a dress rehearsal for a theatrical production, except the participants did not consider it theater. They considered it serious preparation for an imminent event. Final training before the real premiere. And the numbers of support within Israel are growing constantly. Opinion polls show that approximately 30% of the Israeli Jewish population actively supports the temple's reconstruction. Among Orthodox religious Jews, that number exceeds 70%. Among religious nationalists, it is practically unanimous. Each year, more Israelis visit the Temple Mount, defying more conservative rabbis who prohibit visits for fear of accidentally stepping where the Holy of Holies was. Organizations like the Temple Mount Faithful movement make symbolic attempts at entry and prayer on the Mount several times a year, especially on significant dates in the Jewish calendar. Each attempt is blocked by security. Each block generates media attention. Each cycle increases the visibility of the cause. Israeli politicians visit the Temple Mount with increasing frequency. Members of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, ascend publicly, sometimes causing diplomatic protests from Muslim countries. What was absolute political taboo 2 decades ago has become an accepted demonstration of Jewish sovereignty over all Israeli territory. The shift in atmosphere is measurable. The subject that was marginal has become mainstream. What was considered religious fanaticism now appears in serious political debates. And here enters the dimension that transforms all of this from specialized religious interest into a matter of relevance for anyone paying attention to global geopolitics and world events. Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 describes someone who will confirm an alliance with many for 1 week. In the middle of the week, he will put an end to sacrifice and grain offering. The original Hebrew language indicates a week of years, 7 years of alliance interrupted in the middle. For sacrifices to cease, they first need to have been resumed. To be resumed in a biblical Jewish context, they need a legitimate altar in a legitimate sacred place. The Temple Mount is the only legitimate place. Therefore, this prophecy seems to require resumption of sacrifices at some future point. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 4, written by the Apostle Paul decades after the crucifixion of Jesus but before the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, describes someone who opposes and exalts himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Many scholars argue that this prophecy was not fulfilled in the destruction of the Second Temple, and therefore requires a third temple still future. Revelation chapter 11 verses 1 and 2 describes the Apostle John receiving divine command. Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it, but exclude the outer court of the temple and do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. This vision describes a temple existing during a specific period of 42 months, 3.5 years, while Jerusalem is occupied by Gentile forces. Again, it seems to require a future physical temple. The convergence of these passages points to a specific scenario: a rebuilt temple, sacrifices resumed, apparently normal functioning for some period, and then a violent interruption in the middle of a 7-year period when someone desecrates the holy place. This temple is frequently called the Tribulation Temple by eschatology scholars, because its period of functioning corresponds to what the scriptures describe as a time of unprecedented tribulation, and all the physical elements for its construction already exist. The $3 million golden candlestick is ready. The gold-overlaid incense altar is ready. The table of showbread is ready. The intricately woven and embroidered priestly garments are ready. The silver trumpets are ready. The Levitical musical instruments are ready or in final reconstruction phase. The altar of uncut stones for sacrifices is ready. More than 500 priests of verified lineage are trained or in training. Potentially qualified red heifers await final inspection. Building stones are cut and stored. Detailed architectural plans are ready for execution. Engineers have calculated every structural requirement. The only element absent is permission to build at the specific location. And history repeatedly demonstrates that apparently impossible situations can change overnight. In 1947, the creation of an independent Jewish state after 2,000 years of Dispersion seemed an impossible fantasy. In 1948, Israel was declared and survived the immediate invasion of 5 Arab armies. In 1966, Jerusalem unified under Jewish control seemed militarily impossible. In June of 1967, it happened in 6 days. The Western Wall was in Jewish hands for the first time since the Roman Empire. Cataclysmic events rewrite rules that seemed permanent. Wars redraw borders considered immutable. Diplomatic treaties create realities that experts swore were impossible. Natural disasters alter physical and political landscapes. Revolutions topple regimes that seemed eternal. Any of these triggers could transform the currently impossible into suddenly viable, the unthinkable into urgent, the forbidden into inevitable. And while the world watches or ignores, the Temple Institute does not slow down. New utensils are manufactured as research reveals additional details. More priests are identified, verified, and trained. More archaeological research is conducted to resolve pending questions about layout and procedures. More stones are cut and stored. More donations arrive from Jews around the world who want to participate financially in the preparation. Evangelical Christians who see prophetic significance in the reconstruction also contribute substantially. The Institute's annual budget exceeds $2 million. The organization employs dozens of people, specialized artisans, rabbinical researchers, educators, administrators. The visitor center receives hundreds of thousands of tourists per year, Jews and non-Jews, all seeing the ready utensils, hearing detailed explanations, leaving with the impression that this is not distant fantasy. It is not a marginal operation of isolated fanatics. It is an established institution with decades of history, connected with significant segments of the Israeli Orthodox religious establishment, supported by donors in multiple countries, covered regularly by international media. And every Sukkot festival, when the ancient temple received special offerings of 70 bulls representing the 70 nations of the world, they hold public demonstrations. Every Passover, when the Paschal lamb was sacrificed in the temple court, they rehearse. Every occasion when temple rituals would be performed, they wear the garments, prepare the altars, position the priests, pronounce the prayers, execute the movements. Year after year, refining, perfecting, getting ever closer to an execution that is no longer rehearsal. The question reporters ask repeatedly to Rabbi Chaim Richman, International Director of the Institute, is always the same. When do you think you will actually be able to build? His answer is always a variation of the same theme. We do not know the moment, but we need to be ready when it comes. Our job is to prepare every detail. The moment belongs to the Creator, and this posture of constant readiness defines the entire operation. It is not an attempt to force prophecy or provoke artificial fulfillment. It is meticulous, patient preparation, decades in the making for when the window opens. When, not if. In some warehouse in Jerusalem, there are stones already cut. In some workshop, there are garments already sewn. In some field, there are red heifers being monitored daily. In some classroom, there are men memorizing rituals that have not been practiced for 2 millennia. Everything waits. History shows that previous temples were destroyed when Israel turned away from God. The first temple fell to Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. The second temple fell to Titus in 70 AD. Prophecy indicates that this third temple will also have a marked destiny, a desecration in the middle of a 7-year period, an end that will precede even more cataclysmic events. But between the construction and the prophesied destruction, there exists a period, and that period, according to the scriptures, will be the most intense that humanity has ever experienced. The preparations are not just for a building, they are preparations for an era, and that era apparently is closer than any previous generation could have imagined.